Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us tonight here for this special International Holocaust Remembrance Day event, Ask Us Anything Holocaust. My name is Alexa. I'm here with Yoav, Guy, and Lindsay. We are all students and graduates of the Weiss Livna International MA Program in Holocaust Studies at the University of Haifa, and we're here tonight to answer your questions about the Holocaust. So about a few days ago, we did a call asking you to submit your questions about the Holocaust. We've collected them. We've added some frequently asked questions as well, things that people often want to know. We're going to start off by answering those on these cards, and then we're going to take your questions from home from the audience. So anything that comes to mind, any question while you're watching this that you want to know the answer to, go ahead and write that in the comments, and we will answer it for you. So we're just going to jump right in. Yoav, why don't you get started?
What other groups of people were persecuted by the Nazis? So the Nazis had a very wide doctrine and many groups that they targeted, not only Jews. This includes the Sinti and Roma, the Polish elites and Polish intellectuals, homosexuals, Slavs, and everybody they deemed socially undesirable. So this includes also people who have physical or mental disability, yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Were some Jews able to pretend that they were not Jews or Aryans? Some. I really don't have any numbers off the top of my head about that, but some Jews were able to. It depended on a few factors. Your looks. If you had a more Aryan facial features and hair color, you were more likely to be able to pass as Aryan. If you had some connections to underground resistance movements that were able to forge documents for you and create new identities, you might be able to hide in plain sight. But the overwhelming majority of people who were able to do this, or Jews who were able to do this, were women, and that's mostly because Jewish men are traditionally circumcised, and so it would be very easy to identify a Jew, a Jewish man, and women didn't have that obstacle in their way, and so they were more able to mix in with society.
How did Hitler and the Nazis come to power? That's a very good question. In the last democratic elections that took part in Germany, the Nazi party came out the biggest party, and that was enough for the German president to appoint Hitler as Chancellor of Germany, the Prime Minister. Once in power, Hitler and his political allies dismantled the democratic constitution of Germany piece by piece. And the most important landmark was the law of empowerment that enabled the German government, headed by Hitler, to legislate laws without the approval of the parliament. And the rest is history.
Next question. What does Nazi mean? So it seems like it would be a really simple one. This term, really the name is an acronym. It's the acronym for the political party. In English, it's the National Socialist Democratic Workers' Party. The acronym in German would be the NSDAP. The term Nazi itself, N-A-Z-I, likely comes from the first two words, which are National and Sozialismus, N-A-Z-I, and that's the term we have right there. Nazi, it's important also to point out that this term was really not used very frequently in German during the Third Reich, during the time that the Nazis were in power. If anything, it was used as a derogatory term. Commonly, people would use the term National Socialist between each other. The term Nazi, again, was a derogatory term or a term used often after the war to describe followers and members of the political party.
The next question, how did the Nazis determine who was Jewish? Okay, well, that's a bit complicated, but I'll try to keep it simple. In 1935, the Nazis enacted a series of laws titled the Nuremberg Laws, which basically determines who is racially, quote-unquote, racially Jewish according to the state. Now, the laws determine that people have 3 or more Jewish grandparents, and that's regardless if they identify as Jews or if their parents identified as Jewish. Regardless, if they had 3 or more Jewish grandparents, they were considered Jewish. These people had their German citizenship revoked, and it's important to say that although this was the law, it wasn't the golden rule. There were some circumstances that people with even less than 3 Jewish grandparents were considered Jewish. It's also important to remember that this applies only to Germany. In Poland and other occupied countries, the Germans didn't screen so much. If you had virtually any affinity with Jewish people, you were considered Jewish and were subject to persecution.
What exactly is a concentration camp? How is that different than a death camp? Okay, it's a little bit of a heavy question, but I'm really glad it's here because I think that a lot of people often think that the term concentration camp is used to describe all camps that existed during the Holocaust, and that's not true. The Nazi camp system was very complex, and it also evolved throughout the war. But basically, a concentration camp, it's a place where people are forcibly imprisoned against their will without any sort of legal trial, even though the camp exists within like a legal state. There were over 1,000 concentration camps across Germany and Poland of all varying sizes. Camps had infrastructure. They served a purpose, so they usually had elements of forced labor in them. And life in concentration camps was like horrifically inhumane. People were starving. People were severely malnourished. They were overcrowded, exposure. They were disease everywhere. They were brutally overworked. And of course, the constant fear of violence and death was all around. An extermination camp or a death camp, on the other hand, well, it really wasn't a camp at all. People didn't even sleep there usually one night. Victims would arrive by train. They would immediately be gassed in either some sort of gas chamber or gas vans. There were 6 extermination camps, and 2 of them, including, of course, the most famous, is Auschwitz-Birkenau. That was a combination concentration extermination camp. So some people arrived into the camp, and they were put into the camp system as inmates and prisoners, and other people who arrived were gassed immediately upon arrival. And I'll just mention these camps, these 6 extermination camps, they were all built intentionally on German-occupied Poland. They were not in Germany.
Well, the next question, was there segregation in Germany before the Nazi rise to power? And the answer is no. Before the Nazi rise to power, German Jews were completely assimilated in German society. But after the Nazi rise to power, Jews were not allowed in parks, swimming pools, theaters, and Jewish children were even banned from German schools.
All right. Next question is, what is a ghetto? What was life like there? So ghettos, we'll start out by saying the first ghettos did not happen during the Holocaust. They happened in the 16th century in Italy, and they were historically places that Jews were segregated and forced to live in very small sections of a city. Ghettos, when we're talking about the Holocaust, were these blocked off sections of oftentimes large cities where Jews who were living in that city prior to it, and also Jews who were living in the surrounding areas, were forcibly moved to. They were incredibly crowded areas of the city, in poorly built buildings. Jews and the rest of their families and their neighbors and their loved ones were forced to live there. They obviously had no choice. Oftentimes, multiple generations of a family would be forced to live in a very small apartment. They lived there under terrible conditions. If we're thinking about this part of the world, we know how cold it can get. There was no real sense of heating going on in the apartments and the buildings that they were living in. They were very cramped. They were very small food rations, so people died of starvation abundantly. And as you can imagine, with close quarters and a lot of people and very little, if any, medical care, diseases ran rampant. In some of these ghettos, Jews were forced to work in factories or other forced labor sections of the ghetto for 12, 14, 16 hours a day with very little, if any, kind of pay. And we see tens of thousands of people dying in these ghetto systems, whether, like I said, from disease or starvation or exposure to the elements, or directly being killed by the Gestapo who controlled the ghettos. Some of these ghettos lasted for just a matter of days or weeks. They were temporary places where Jews lived. Some of them, like the Warsaw Ghetto, for example, stood for years. And eventually, at a certain point in the war, these ghettos were liquidated, meaning their entire populations were cleared out and transported onto the concentration camps or the death camp system.
The next question. Oh, were there any countries who saved their Jews? That's an excellent question, and I really wish this was told more often, because the answer is yes, and not many people know that. So the most famous story is the story of the Jews of Denmark, who were sailed across into Sweden, and thereby the vast majority of the Jewish population in Denmark had been saved. Another example is Albania. Albania is a Muslim majority country. It didn't have so many Jews in the beginning of the war, but it is the only country that had more Jews after the war than before the war. And hence, it saved, not only saved, but also absorbed some of the Jews in the surrounding countries.
I always love that story because I feel like it is, you're right, nobody ever talks about it. And like Albania specifically, I mean, they like started with like less than 100 Jews, and then at the end they had like 2,000 Jews or something. Is that correct?
I'm not really sure about the numbers, but it is a big difference, and many more Jews have come to be saved in Albania, which, as I said, is a majority Muslim country.
Yeah, that is such a good story. Okay, why didn't the Jews fight back? Well, the answer is that some did. This question, usually people ask it because they want to know why didn't the Jews fight back with some sort of weapons or violence, and the answer is that some did when they could, given that they had very limited weaponry resources and were up against a fully equipped professional military army, as well as all sorts of local Nazi collaborators. But still, in over 100 ghettos, there were underground armed resistance activities, the most famous, of course, being the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where a young group of resistance fighters held off the Nazis for about 3 weeks. And we also have, we have partisans, so we have young people who fled from the ghettos and they joined partisan groups in the forest, and they were involved in some sabotage activities and rescue efforts. And we even have 3 examples of armed uprisings in the extermination camps themselves, which, I mean, that was really, if there's a term against all odds, that is the time to use it. But, you know, I think that it's important to say that resistance has many faces, and it's not just about violence or using weapons. Jews fought back in a lot of different ways, whether that was distributing underground newspapers or writing diaries of their daily experiences. You know, we talked about the ghettos earlier. Inside the ghettos, there was a lot of efforts to resist spiritually against the Nazis, whether that was running schools for children or soup kitchens, anything that would give people a semblance of normal life. And, you know, in Holocaust studies, we always say that the act of surviving in and of itself was a form of resistance, and that's 100% true.
I agree. Why didn't more Jews leave Europe before the war? The simple answer is that they had no place to go to. For many European Jews in the late 1930s, the world was divided to countries they could not live in any longer, and countries that they could not go to. We have to bear in mind that during the late 1930s, many countries around the world were still struggling with the outcomes of the big economic depression, and nobody wanted immigrants, let alone Jews, so no place to go.
I think there's already question number 16 we've gotten to. All right, so the next one, this is actually a really good one, a question that I've heard since I was a very small child and I first learned about the Holocaust. I always heard this as a rumor. Did Hitler have Jewish ancestry? I'm sure a lot of us have heard the same rumor, and that's really all it is. It's simply a rumor. There's absolutely zero historical fact to back up this idea whatsoever. I'm not actually sure where this got started from. I think part of it came from the fact that Hitler's Adolf Hitler's paternal grandfather has no biological father listed on his birth certificate, so there's rumors that he was they didn't really know who his biological father was, and there's a story that his grandmother, when she was a young woman, she was working as a housekeeper in a Jewish family, and she was somehow raped by the Jewish man of the house, therefore impregnating her, and later she gave birth to Hitler's grandfather. There's absolutely no facts behind this, so I have to say that that is not true.
The next question is, what does the word Holocaust mean? That's a good question. So the word Holocaust derives from Greek. It means burning sacrifice or making sacrifice. It originally applied to animals, and obviously because of the burning element, it was also applied to the Jews in the Holocaust. In Hebrew, though, there's a different name. It's called the Shoah, which is another name that is being used in many places in the world, also in France. A Shoah means a catastrophe. And personally, I think this term appeals to me more than the notion of sacrificing.
I agree. All right. Okay, I have a question I think we can answer as a group, actually. So, what is the strangest or most surprising thing you've ever learned about the Holocaust?
Oh, that's a good one.
That is a good one.
Well, I have to say that the strangest thing that surprised me when I learned about Holocaust was that to find out that Germans used ashes of Jews who were cremated after being gassed to produce fertilizers.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's a bad one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've learned that I was surprised to learn that some people have actually paid for their ticket to the camps. That is that's relevant to the Jews of Saloniki from Greece. They had to pay their tickets to be transported to Auschwitz, and that's just mind-blowing that you have to pay to be killed.
Terrible ticket.
Terrible.
Yeah. I would say, well, there's a lot of them. I think I would say there's a story, there's lots of different stories, right, that you hear. What was always most captivating to me is the story of Jan Karski, who is this Polish non-Jewish man, but was very intent on telling the world what was happening during the Holocaust, when it was actually happening, not just after, but during the time. And so he actually smuggled himself into the Warsaw Ghetto, not once, but twice, which is really almost impossible to imagine physically doing that, and actually that you would have the desire to go into this horrible, horrible place, not once, but twice, to figure out what's going on, and then he tried to tell the rest of the world what happened.
He also smuggled into a camp. I can't think of which one it is right now. Izvica, yeah. And that's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I'd say the most surprising thing that I've learned about the Holocaust is that some concentration camps were insured by an insurance company, not the people, obviously, unfortunately, but the buildings and the barracks. And the insurance company, Alliance, is what I believe it's pronounced, it gets a little bit more ironic because before the Holocaust, Jews living in Germany had life insurance policies taken out from this company. And then after the Holocaust, surviving members of the families of people who had died but who had these life insurance policies tried to make claims on them. And then that company told them, we need proof of death, which they obviously was no,
How do you get that?
There's no death certificates, but that was the same company that had actually insured Auschwitz, the buildings and the barracks in Auschwitz. And then they were asking people to...
That's bizarre.
Yeah, there's been a lot of legal suits around that.
Insurance companies.
I don't know.
Okay, next question. Was everyone who was murdered in the Holocaust gassed to death? Well, indeed, many Jewish victims of the Holocaust were gassed to death, but other Jewish victims were shot by special murder squads into killing pits. And of course, as Lindsay told us before, many Jews died in ghettos because of starvation, cold, disease, and so forth.
All right, moving along. What about the local populations in European countries? This is a good question, kind of connected with what youve was speaking about earlier. What exactly happened with the non-Jewish populations that weren't specifically targeted by the Nazis, I guess. So it really depends on which country we're talking about, right? We're talking about a massive amount of people, a massive amount of area. You have in some countries there were different laws pertaining to the civilian population, the non-Jewish civilian population, such as in Poland, it was punishable by death if you were caught trying to save Jews, whereas in other countries it wasn't punishable by death. So it really depends on who we're talking about. There were, like Yoav was saying, there were people who tried to save their Jewish neighbors or Jewish, even Jewish people that they didn't know. We know that Yad Vashem and the State of Israel has recognized 27,000 people who risked their lives trying to save the lives of Jews. But again, it's not exactly an accurate figure because we don't really know what happened in history, right? If somebody tried to save their Jewish neighbors and they were killed in the process, then we would have no idea of that because we wouldn't be able to tell the story afterwards. So it really depends place by place.
Moving on. Why are people anti-Semitic?
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Wow. That's a very complicated question. I think Lindsay started touching on the issue earlier. And essentially, it's important to understand that anti-Semitism is not a new phenomenon. It's not a modern phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that existed for thousands of years, I believe from Greco-Roman times until today. And the term anti-Semitism, there's a common misconception about it. Many people think that it refers to the hatred towards all people who speak Semitic languages, including Arabic and Hebrew and Amharic. That's actually not true. The term has been coined specifically to refer to hatred towards Jews. And this hatred has existed throughout history. Now, Lindsay mentioned before that Christianity, deriving from Judaism and trying to get away from Judaism, Christianity really enhanced the hatred towards Jews with stories and blood libels, like Jews killed Jesus, and blood libels and other stories that have existed and prevailed throughout the years, including that Jews are trying to kill or to take the place of other people in the world. And the Jews were essentially a scapegoat. They were a minority group living within a non-Jewish majority societies, plural, and they were the number one scapegoat to blame for all of the problems of the world. And too often, this rhetoric in history lead to violence, and violence includes expulsion, and it includes, of course, the final solution. It's important to remember that anti-Semitism, when Hitler and the Nazis come to power, they actually take advantage of so many elements in anti-Semitism throughout history, and they bring them to light, and they kind of restructure them and embody them in their propaganda, and kind of enhance the hatred towards Jews. And anti-Semitism exists till today. It has evolved with history, it diversified, it exists till today, and it is still a big issue around the world.
Definitely. I think that's a big reason why we've all, chosen to study Holocaust studies and are involved in this field, because anti-Semitism is
not going away.
Oh my God. On the nose here, what is Holocaust denial? And why do people deny the Holocaust? Holocaust denial is essentially when a person denies the historical realities and the true extent of the Holocaust. So I would say that it's relatively uncommon to meet anybody today who will say flat out the Holocaust never happened in its entirety. But most people today, they engage in something called Holocaust distortion, and I think that that's much more dangerous, personally. Holocaust distortionists, essentially they'll say yes, the Holocaust happened, and then they'll deny the use of gas chambers, or they will minimize the number of victims, or they will claim that there was never this intention to mass murder the Jews of Europe. There was never this organized plan. But anybody who denies the Holocaust or is a Holocaust distortionist, as far as why do people deny the Holocaust, they're anti-Semitic. That's pretty much the main reason. There is no other reason for a person to deny the most well-documented genocide in history other than that. But people do, and oftentimes they also have these motivations that are nationalistic sentiments, and they're usually tied to hate groups. They call themselves truth seekers or historical revisionists, and they're usually doing this because they believe that Nazism should be an acceptable political alternative today. And we can definitely see that, in a lot of places.
What companies used forced laborers during the Holocaust? Well, many German companies we know today exploited forced labor during the Holocaust. Volkswagen, BMW, Siemens. Do you have any other names?
Bayer Pharmaceuticals. Yeah.
Hugo Boss.
Right from the promo. There's Audi. I
And
think, is
more,
one of
and
them.
more.
Yeah.
Farben.
Right.
IG Farben.
IG Farben, huge, yeah.
Bayer, which is now Bayer, or
Yeah.
used to
Bayer
be
was
Bayer,
part
was
of
in-
them, and
Yeah.
they had tons of companies involved.
And many
in that.
more.
and many more. All right, so next question. Why the yellow star? Right, like we've seen this in, sure, Holocaust movies or Holocaust books or something like that, that in some places, let me take this off, much more comfortable. The yellow star is mandatory for Jews living in a certain area to put on their coats or somehow visible to the outside world that, yes, they are in fact Jewish. In some places, it was a yellow star. In some places, it was an armband around one of their arms that was white with a blue star or a black star on it. So it really depends. But again, like you all was saying about anti-Semitism, and this is not something that was completely new or completely made up by the Third Reich or by the Nazis. We see this color yellow, sometimes red also, but a lot of times yellow, being used to mark Jews, forcibly mark Jews on their clothing, whether that's like a yellow circle on their jackets or a yellow hat that they had to wear, going back even to the Middle Ages in Europe. And again, stemming from this idea that Jews are outsiders in society, they're a separate group of people, they cannot be part of normal Christian society. And why the color yellow? Historically, this color has a connection to this idea of hatred or disease, right? Like that this is an infected person that we either hate or we do not want to get near.
Right. This is my final card.
Ooh.
What happened to Holocaust survivors after the Holocaust? All right, so first of all, when we speak about survivors after the Holocaust, we're not only speaking about survivors from camps, but also people who have lived in hiding during the war, or people who fled to other places from Nazi persecution. These people, after the war, come back, or try to come back to their homes, but many of them soon realize that they no longer have a home to go back to. First of all, their families have been murdered. Very often the properties have been taken over without being able to retrieve them back. And they soon realize that this is not a place they could actually restart their life and build a future. And many of them find themselves living in or concentrating in displaced persons camps, DP camps, that were established in occupied Germany or liberated Germany after the war. And from there, they seek to go elsewhere. Now, many people, Jews from Western countries, Western Europe that is, were able to go back to their homes. In Eastern Europe, it's more difficult, not only because of what I mentioned, the families being murdered and the properties being taken over, but also because anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic incidents still kept going even after the war. We had the very famous pogrom in Kielce in 1946, but there were other events that brought people to seek future elsewhere. Ultimately, after a few years in the displaced persons camps, they immigrated. The vast majority of them immigrated outside of Europe to Israel first and foremost, and then to the United States and Australia and other countries as well.
Your grandparents were in a displaced persons camp, right?
Indeed,
Yeah.
yes. My grandparents were in Berlin, in Staffensee, which is a camp near Berlin.
My grandparents also were in a DP camp. They met there and got married there,
Oh.
which was a really common story with DP camps. There were like tons of marriages, and I think in Bergen-Belsen they had 1,000 births
Yes, the first year.
in the first year.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, they wasted no time getting
That
Having
is
happiness again.
Bergen-Belsen liberated.
The liberated, yes, I
Right.
don't want that.
And
Bergen-Belsen,
also-
the liberated displaced persons camp.
And also, they didn't want to be alone anymore.
Of course.
Yes.
They had no families. Most of them were alone, and
Yeah.
that was an easy way to have companionship. Okay, so my last question. Why didn't the Allies bomb Auschwitz? That's a little bit of a complex debate, I think, going on out there. So I'll keep it kind of short and say that we do know that the Allies had aerial photos of Auschwitz and the surrounding area, and they also had firsthand information of what was going on inside the camp. But their perspective, their belief, was that winning the war was the fastest way that they were going to save the Jews in Auschwitz and the Jews in Europe in general. They adopted a slogan, the Allies, they had a slogan that was rescue through victory, and they believed they needed to focus all of their efforts on the larger war effort, and that was the best way they were going to save Jews. And I guess that's relatively true. And again, like, we're just scratching the surface on such a complex debate. But I will say that the Allies were not as concerned with saving Jews as the Nazis were with killing them. Like, the Allies' motivation was not to rescue the Jews of Europe, it was to defeat Hitler and Nazism, and the rescue efforts was secondary at best.
Okay, how many Jews, how many Jews were murdered in the Holocaust? How do we know? And do we have their names? Actually, those are 3 questions. Well, most scholars agree that the number of Jewish victims during the Holocaust is roughly 6 million. And how do we know that? We have several sources. One of them is making comparisons between censuses of European countries before the war and after the war. Another source is lists made by the Nazis themselves, and also many testimonies of survivors after the war about their families. Do we have their names? Yad Vashem, the Israeli Holocaust Remembrance Authority, has managed to collect up to now roughly 4.8 million names.
Incredible.
Yeah, and we'll probably never reach the full list of 6 million names, because in so many cases, entire families, entire communities were exterminated till the last one, and nobody was left to say or tell us who were they, what were their names.
I always think about that. I always think about that when they find sometimes in, like, Ukraine and areas these pits that they
Yeah.
said this was a shooting, and they find 200 bodies. Up until that point, nobody had even thought of any of those people.
Right.
Yeah.
There's nobody left.
Like, there's nobody left who's even thought about what happened to those people.
Absolutely. All right, last one. This is kind of a nice one to go on from. Kind of talk about what we were just speaking about. Did people get married and have babies during the Holocaust? We kind of referenced what happened afterwards. But actually, during the time of the Holocaust, during the time of the war, did people get married and have babies? And the answer is yes. It obviously wasn't something that was done in the same way that it was done before so, but yes, people got married secretly, right? They didn't register it with some kind of government or something like that. They had a secret ceremony, small ceremony, and from that, babies were born. So yes, it did happen.
It's also worth mentioning, though, that it wasn't entirely legal or authorized by the Germans to have babies and get married.
Absolutely.
And that a woman that got into the concentration camp and was pregnant or had a child was immediately sent with the child to the gas chambers.
That's
Right.
Pregnant women and women with children were like the easiest
Right.
targets for the Nazis, and often the first to be killed.
Right. Right.
Okay, guys, so we've finished with our first questions. They were great. I hope you enjoyed
Yeah.
the answers and learned something from us.
Great
And
questions,
we're
everyone.
going to just jump into some of your questions from home. So we have some of them popping up here on the screen. Yoav, why don't you go ahead and start with the first?
Well, I love this question. I get it a lot, and I guess all of us get it a lot. So, what do you think is the best Holocaust movie?
Oh, I thought I was going to say book. Movie's better.
No.
Read books, but movie's better.
What do you think?
I really like Jacob the Liar. It's a 1999 film from with Robbie Williams. It's based on a novel called with the same name, Jacob the Liar. And one of the reasons I like it most is that it really touches on very abstract elements, like the rumors in the ghetto, which is something that I look into in my research as well.
What is yours, Alexa?
Okay, my favorite, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. The best Holocaust movie that I think that I've seen is Son of Saul, which I'm sure a lot of viewers at home have seen. I think it stands out to me because it really, from the first second, just throws you into the concentration camp life. And I think they do such a great way of portraying the chaos that is there. Even down to things like the fact that, not everyone in a concentration camp spoke the same languages. People did, keep to themselves and keep to people from their own communities and languages, but sometimes people were working together. One person spoke Yiddish and somebody else spoke Polish and somebody else spoke Greek, and people didn't all have the same, and I think they do such a good job of showing that mix and just the general chaos that was happening in the camp.
I think it was nominated or won Academy Awards a couple of years
Yes.
ago. Yeah.
Foreign movie.
Also,
Yeah,
it has an incredible soundtrack, so you could really listen to. I mean, I never thought about that. How did this sound like?
Right.
What did it sound like in
Yeah,
camps?
yeah.
Or ghettos? I mean, I know there's some research kind of on the sounds
Yeah.
that happen in places like that, in
Right.
spaces and places, but so that's my...
What do you think, Lindsay?
I have to say, I think these are all really great, fantastic movies. I would say the best Holocaust movie that I have seen is The Pianist. Why is it a great movie? First of all, it's a really fantastic, well-done movie. It's a story, the real-life story of Władysław, sorry to all my Polish friends, butcher that name a little bit, Spielman, who is a well-known pianist in Poland, in Warsaw specifically, before the war. It's based off of his memoir. The movie is almost word for word what he wrote, so it's accurate, right? It doesn't really take a lot of creative, you agree? Like, it doesn't take a lot of creative liberties, which I can really respect. It really tries to tell the truth. And I also like is like a strange word, we're talking about the Holocaust, but it's nice how it shows this dynamic sense of personalities, right? That there were Jews who collaborated with the Nazis, there were Jews who didn't, there were Germans and Poles who tried to save Jews, but of course there were Germans and Poles who turned in their neighbors and were part of the Gestapo. So it really adds like a nice depth when we're looking at this story. What do you think?
I agree. That would be my choice too, The Pianist.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That was great. Definitely one of the best. Adrian Brody was just
Amazing.
amazing.
And he won an Academy Award.
Yeah, as
Also-
he should. I mean, well deserved.
I will say, for anybody who's looking to get into Holocaust movies, just keep in mind when if you happen to be watching a movie about the Holocaust, it is in fact a movie, to make sure that you research anything afterwards, that it's not necessarily a documentary.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
No,
We
it
forget
is.
sometimes.
No, because a lot of things come out. Like, I'll go there for a second. Hunters on Netflix,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Amazon Prime.
Amazon Prime, yeah.
And, there's a lot of controversy around that movie, the series, because, yes, there was, like, the original truth in the idea that there might have been some Nazis living in the U.S. in certain areas, but, I mean, they made things up.
Yeah.
And they made things so that weren't unnecessary. The Holocaust was bad enough. We don't need to make up new things
Yeah.
that are more sadistic than the realities of it. And that's a big danger, I feel, with Holocaust things.
I agree.
Okay, so we move on to the next question then?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Why is International Holocaust Memorial Day on January 27th? Well, because on that day, exactly 76 years ago, Auschwitz-Birkenau was liberated by the Soviet Red Army.
Is there any other Holocaust Remembrance Day that happens in the
An
year?
Israeli Remembrance Day.
But it's not today.
No. It's usually in April, and with linkage to the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto.
Right.
Right.
The uprising originally took place on the eve of Passover,
Right.
which is not exactly a great day to have a Remembrance Day. Hence, it was postponed 2 weeks afterwards to be 1 week exactly after Passover.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see. Okay. Ooh. Okay. This is something you hear a lot. Did the Nazis really make soap from the fat of Jewish bodies? I don't know know why this myth is like so permeated into culture, but like let me set the record straight. That is absolutely false. And actually something interesting about this rumor is that the rumor started in the Holocaust itself. Jews in concentration camps, like when they would shower, like a real shower, the guards would give them soap and they would like cruelly joke and say like, this is made out of your loved ones, or this is made out of your family members. Or they would threaten people and they would say, we're going to kill you and we're going to turn you into soap. And so people in the camps, like they believed that this was really happening. Like at that point, you believe anything, you know, and why wouldn't that be true? So that, why it kind of continued on after the camps and is part of our like consciousness today is we find it in survivor testimonies and memoirs that are written immediately after the Holocaust, because that is their experience, what they believed what was happening. And that's kind of how the rumor continued on, but every Holocaust institution will tell you that no evidence of that has even been ever been corroborated. I even read a story not that long ago that was saying that certain, at the time, Jews who had, you know, come to Israel had brought some of that soap with them, buried it here, because in Judaism, you must bury the whole of a body. And so they would bring them and they buried him. And then in the 90s, they, just to confirm, even though there already was no evidence, they did do some DNA testing on that soap, and like there was nothing human about it. So not true.
Very bizarre, like a very bizarre myth. So the next one is, what are the neo-Nazis? What ideologies did they share with the Nazis of the Third Reich? I mean, I can imagine this comes up a lot. Even in the last, I guess, couple of years, but especially now, people are talking about what are neo-Nazis? Are they really like Nazis? They use a lot of the same symbology. We see this in a lot of places in the world, especially now in the United States. Neo-Nazis share similar ideology and the same idea that they're trying to restore their former glory, whatever that might be, as a white Protestant heterosexual group of people that just want to continue their lineage and continue their what they see as their God-given right to live in a certain place. What they share is the fear and the hatred and the desire to harm these other groups of people, which of course are Jews, but also include immigrants, Muslims, homosexuals, anybody who kind of fits outside of that bubble of perfection in their eyes, in their what they see to be the supreme white race. Yeah, pretty unfortunate group.
Yeah.
So. And I will say that we do see some of the same terminology that they used a couple of years ago in this Unite the Right rally in the United States. One of the chants used by this neo-Nazi or white supremacist group is that Jews will not replace us. That's what they were like shouting in this overnight rally with these torches, and this, again, going to this idea that Jews or other groups of people could replace them or kick them out of society.
I think like what's even scarier is like in, I don't know, like Germany, for example, there are these movements that they're not as overt about saying like we are neo-Nazis or we identify with Nazism, but they very much are, you know, aligned to those beliefs. And, you know, similar to like when people deny the Holocaust, like these people just really want Nazism to be acceptable as like a normal political party that you can have.
Yeah.
All right, so looking at the clock, we have time for one more question.
Okay.
You all want to go
Should
ahead?
I?
Yeah.
All right. Is it inappropriate to make Holocaust comparisons?
Good question.
Oh, gosh.
That's a bit of a group question here. I'll try to give my spiel about it, but I'm open to any other views on that. That depends on what a comparison is. I think when one makes a comparison, you don't have to only point out what is similar, but also what is different. And I think that making Holocaust references and comparisons is sometimes important if we are committed to the notion of never again. This should never happen again, and this should be pointed out wherever it arises. It does disturb me, however, that sometimes people, they call one another Nazis, or it's very common. Sometimes in Israel, you hear that coming towards police officers, towards military soldiers. That's frightening to me. I think that's where it crosses the line. for me. But what do you think?
Well, I agree, and I think it's mostly out of ignorance. I think that everybody who learns thoroughly about the Holocaust wouldn't dare compare daily life or anything political with the Holocaust. That's my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it is a very easy comparison to make. It's a really quick and it gets the point across. But like you're saying, it's not historically accurate, and it does distort the effect of the Holocaust, and does distort the historical reality of what actually happened during the Holocaust. So even though it might be tempting to say this or make that easy comparison, I think we really have to stay away from it at all costs, because it's not.
Let me take you one step further and say, when you make Holocaust comparisons, they're not just trivializing the Holocaust, you're trivializing whatever you're comparing the Holocaust to.
Yeah.
There's this idea, we live in this world of comparative suffering. Everything always has to be compared to something. And when you try to compare something to the Holocaust, you're never gonna, except for some very, very particular things, you're never really gonna reach something that could be comparable in that way. And I think it's important to just say that something can be absolutely awful, terrible, demand our attention, demand outrage, and still not be the Holocaust.
Yeah.
It can just be two separate things that exist in the same world. So those are my feeling about that.
Lots to think about.
Lots to think about.
Food for thought.
It is. So we did kind of want to finish up by giving you all some more resources. If you enjoyed learning about the Holocaust and would like to know how you could find out more information from home, we're going to share a couple of what we think are the best resources.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal one really quick.
First of all, the Yad Vashem website.
Yeah.
Yad Vashem website. I'll follow that up with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum website. It's very, very user-friendly, in my opinion.
Yeah. There's a lot of digital resources, like they're saying, these websites. There's also really fantastically done podcasts. One that's really easy if you're just getting into this is called Without the Footnotes. It's a really great podcast for learning from a very beginning place what happened.
I will add that there are several museums, Yad Vashem and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museums have been mentioned, but also to learn a bit more about Jewish society, especially in Poland before the war. There's a museum called Poland in Poland, which is fantastic, and I think it's really learning about the Holocaust. Sometimes you want to understand what happened, what was there before to exterminate, and it was such a rich and such a vibrant society that is just very intriguing to delve into. And also in Poland, the Ringelblum archive that has a lot of documentation from the Warsaw Ghetto that could teach you and has taught me a lot about the topic.
Yeah, and I'll throw one more out there before we finish. Even though we're talking about something that did happen decades ago, I mean, like I was saying, the liberation of Auschwitz was 76 years ago. There still are Holocaust survivors living all over the world, here in Israel, in North America, South America, Europe, former Soviet Union, all South Africa, Australia, really everywhere except for Antarctica, as far as I'm aware. I would encourage you to get in touch with a speakers bureau or your local community and see how you can potentially volunteer with them, check in with them, and learn more about their stories directly from them.
Definitely.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to say that I'm sure there are a lot more questions. I'm only seeing what's showing up right now. I'm sure there's a lot more questions in the comments. So you guys know how it works on TikTok. This live is not going to live on forever, but we are uploading it onto YouTube. Please post your questions there, and we promise we are going to answer them all individually. So we did not miss out on you. We did not forget you. Your answers will come to you. So thanks so much for joining us, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.